Peter Gerhardt, you all know who Dr. Peter Gerhardt is, I would imagine. He is basically the rock star in the area of transition and sex ed, and we're really excited, and we're so very lucky to be able to have Dr. Peter Gerhardt, work with us, but not just in a superficial way, like I said, but really a deep exploration of this topic. And so that the objective really is you get the information that you need, but for us, the goal is to create the level of independence for you so that you can start thinking independently, looking at things from Peter's perspective. And the context and the ability to think and be able to make decisions is so very critical. And rather than me reading the bio, because you guys can all read, what I'd like to do is to have Peter talk a little bit about his background and how he got to where he is today.
Thank you. First, I really want to thank both Karen and Amanda and Special Learning Inc. For putting up with me in this process and allowing me to do this. I have my own executive functioning deficits that they accommodated and worked with, and I really appreciate it. Plus, everybody associated with this sort of made me think again about it. Sometimes you get into a groove that may be a good groove, but isn't necessarily always the right thing. So it was I just wanted to thank you both for doing it. Karen said, a rock star or whatever. In many ways, I'm lucky enough that I was a big fish in a little pond. Because I started with adolescents and adults back in 1980, nobody else was doing it. Like, it wasn't really all that interesting. And then, in 87, with Lovas's article on early intensive behavioral intervention, everybody flocked in our field to working with little kids. So again, that sort of left me out in the field, and I often talk about that. If I worked in early intervention and I was as knowledgeable as I am in my field as I would be in early intervention, I would be one of a lot of people doing it. But because I've worked in this sort of different area, I get to sort of claim a certain status because I had very little competition, which is not, a huge mark of success, but I will accept it. I am the classic result of the consequences of my life. I never planned to do any of this. I started back in 1980, undergraduate at Rutgers University, psychology major, junior year. I signed up for a fieldwork course to work with typical kids, which was supposed to be a very easy course, and everybody else signed up for it, so I got closed out of it and assigned to work with kids with autism at the Douglas Developmental Disability Center. Thankfully, Sandy Harris, one of my personal and professional heroes, assigned me to the adolescent classroom. This is 1980. Like, autism, people didn't know much about it. My first textbook in applied behavior analysis was actually Bellick and Hurston's behavior modification. So we weren't even using the term applied behavior analysis yet. So, this goes back a way. And honestly, back in 1980, anything we did with adolescents, people reinforced us for. Oh, we're taking the kids out to lunch today. Oh, good for you. That's really great. That's great. That's really impressive. Oh, we're teaching them to make lunch today. Oh, good for you. That's really great. That's really, oh, we're going shopping today. Good for, the problem is I go to a lot of transition programs today and I see them doing the same thing we did back in 1980. The field of transitioning and transition to adulthood hasn't changed all that much in 37 years, unfortunately. Now, there have been changes. Yes, I'm not saying that nothing has changed. But compared to the field of early intervention, the field of educational inclusion, the field of assessment, intervention, and problematic behavior, we've sort of lagged behind, which is really a shame because all of you here listening today and watching today, and I tell my staff this all the time, you are your students' last best chance for a real life. You are that last person who's going to be able to give them the skills while you still have an educational entitlement so that they can have a life of what we call competence, dignity, and quality. Now that's a big goal, and I think that's an overwhelming amount of pressure, quite honestly. But that's also why every day I think is a new challenge for me, and every day is a new experience, because there's always a next thing to look at. So that's sort of who I am. That's how I got to here today. So why don't we then keep going?
This probably doesn't surprise you, but we go through life and there's a ton of different transitions. So these include things like chronological transitions, as you can see, skill transitions. So learning new skills, inevitably lead to transitions. But there's also some transitions that we don't talk about as much, and these are things that occur within society, so the norms in society. And these, we were having a conversation, Peter and I, and these are absolutely applicable, and these are important for people to think about and to plan for. So things like sitting on someone's lap, what age does that become inappropriate? But that's a transition that the students that we're working with have to make. And it's awkward sometimes, but those types of transitions need directly taught. So at some point it becomes inappropriate to follow the adult into the restroom and into the stall. When you're a small child, it's okay, that's what kids do, but those are subtle transitions that we're not always thinking about. And as the educators of these students, those are things we need to think about, we need to plan for. So hugs and kisses, those are certainly examples, but there's also things within cultures and international traditions too that we have listed here that are transitions for our youth that we need to be considering. All right. So this is Peter's central slide. He feels this is the most important, so I'll turn it to you, Peter.
Yeah, I am, Katie said she's a fundamentalist, behavior analyst, and I have to agree with her. And I'm also a big world behavior analyst. Like, I think our field has far more to offer than just what is in the autism literature. And I think oftentimes we get sort of stuck in that little box and don't look beyond it. But I also, whenever I'm in trouble, when I can't figure something out, I return to the 7 dimensions. That's sort of where I go back and I look like, am I doing this? Am I doing that? And when you talk about transition and leading adult lives, like, I think, the whole idea of this producing strong, socially important effects that generalize to new environments, continue after formal treatment has ended, really are the 2 most important. I often will talk about, independent of how evidence-based your intervention is, teaching the wrong skill well is no better than teaching the right skill poorly. And I go to a lot of places and I see incredibly competent, like, behavior analysts teaching skills, in a very clinically brilliant way, but the skill is nonsense. So it really means very little. And I think our field sometimes falls victim of being enamored by the behavior analysis part as opposed to the applied part. And I think it's really all 3 that are part of this. And we'll talk about where there's this sort of dearth of research in adolescents and adults and transition. Part of that really is because when you're doing that, you just can't control all the variables that are required to get published in high prestige journals.
Right.
So there's a lot of good stuff that goes on out in the real world that just doesn't get documented the way we would like it, or we might hope it could get documented. So I think we always have to be thinking about, is what I'm teaching the right thing to teach? I get so tired of meeting adolescents and young adults, and I have to say, how come nobody taught you this? How'd you get to be 21 and still can't go to the bathroom independently? How'd you get to be 21 and not be able to safely cross the street? Like, how'd you get a high school diploma and, not know how to work as part of a team? All of these things that really make the difference in life, which are the strong socially important effects. So for me, this is where I always come back. I also want to say that the Epic School where I work this year in particular, we're putting a large emphasis on the fact that we should be successful in our classrooms, like we should. Like, we're really smart behavior analysts. We have a whole field of research. Like, we're good. We have resources, you know, but we also control all the variables in our classrooms. Like, we can control everything. The real test of what we do is how well it generalizes outside. So we're now looking at whether or not goals are mastered, not just by can they do it in a classroom, can they do it contingent upon the SD, but do they do it independently outside, which really has to be the ultimate test of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. With the curriculum component here, like, it is a very highly individualized process. And there are some established curriculums out there. I won't go over them. You know, I think some of them are good for some basic needs, but again, we want to write programs based upon what his particular goals are in the context in which this goal is expected to be taught and the behavior is expected to be displayed. So it's going to be a little bit different for every kid, even if it's basically the same skill. So it's so important. I will also point out with this natural environment community-based instruction is we look at it that, like, once you step outside your classroom, every skill set in the world has three parts. There's a production part, a social part, and a navigation part. So if you're going grocery shopping, the production part is, you know, matching the picture list that you have for shopping with the item on the shelf, picking it up and putting it in the basket. Navigation is getting the cart, moving around, not running into people. Like the social part is, what do you do when someone says, excuse me? What do you do when you need somebody to leave? Like, actually waiting appropriate in line, keeping appropriate distance. You know, it becomes a very complex instructional goal. So, you know, we have to sort of look at how the skill really is applied, not just how we think it is. And I really recommend, again, going out with your student and trying this stuff, because we typical people are so amazingly competent that we do so much stuff without even realizing that we're doing it. So if you think you're going to write your TA or your instructional program without going out there and actually observing and seeing how the student does, and it's going to be wrong. I will guarantee it may only be 10% wrong, but it's going to be wrong, because there's stuff that you just do that you don't even realize you do. Mm-hmm. So the curriculum really has to be tailored to the person in their environment for the skills that we're going to be working on, which is then all this part of this community-based instruction thing. So, given our transition statement, like for home, in this case, it really is the next 6 months, he has to make his own lunch at home and school. Well, the challenge is being able to identify highly preferred simple lunches. You know, like, what does he want to make? Mm-hmm. So we need to identify 1 to 3 simple lunches, develop a TA using backwards chaining, target one meal at a time. As that meal is mastered, generalize to home, so on and so forth. So then we go through this whole process to identify these individual goals, what the challenges are going to be, and how do we help solve that challenge. Go to the next one. See, now here's Leisure. Now this is a young man who likes flipping through magazines, but he likes flipping through kind of more kiddie magazines type thing. One of the things that I did immediately was I have like 8,000 comic books, not all of which are worth money, so I brought in about 50 comic books, and now he leafs through comic books, which at least is somewhat more age appropriate than Highlights magazine. Mm-hmm. So we just transitioned one of the parts out of it, but we also thought, since he likes photos, maybe we could try doing something as complex as teaching him how to Photoshop, like taking photos and playing with photos on the computer and developing his own photos. How old is he?
He's 15.
15, okay. With the pay thing, that I think is again, not knowing him, so sometimes this is hard.
Absolutely.
I would actually have him involved in sort of assessing his own performance. So I would, you know, so that he can chart his own data to, like, but then you get to this point, this is where you get paid, man. Like, this is, so, because, and I like doing that because then it's not, You're not saying it. The business isn't saying it. Like, this is just the agreement. Like, this is where we are. So you see your progress. Like, you're getting closer. And it's concrete. It's there.